Thanks for being here. This is our Rules Committee meeting. Let's go around the table and have ourselves to the record. Pete, we'll start with you.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
John Welton.
Bill Evans, Forrest Dunbar.
Eric Croft, Dick Train.
Toby Gray Jackson. Todd.
Todd.
Todd Sherwood, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
Richard Henning, I'm a lieutenant with the police department.
Lisa Slisner, Deputy Municipal Clerk.
Thank you. What we're going to do on this, we've got an agenda here. We're going to go through the ordinance, and then we're going to take assembly questions, and then we've got time for audience participation. It's about an hour, so we'll see how fast we go through it. Todd, do you want to take us through this ordinance?
Yes. I saw Mr. Weddleton raise his hand.
I just wanted to,
I know you got to spend that.
Three, so point.
I'll get you on your amendments.
Maybe.
So
Todd, you wanna walk us through this?
I'll give just a little brief background, and then Lieutenant Henning's gonna talk more about the nuts and bolts of what was behind this, but, it started, the effort by Assemblymember Trainee and then working with Lieutenant Henning's shop to deal with some problems, in particular, copper theft and some involving precious metal theft. And so it's evolved from that beginning. But before I go through the ordinance itself, Lieutenant Henning is going to talk a little bit about the problem that they're trying to solve with this proposed ordinance.
Lieutenant?
Sir, the ordinance, the scrap metal ordinance has been around for a long time as far as us trying to introduce it. It started back in 015, 016 when scrap metals were very high with certain metals. It's in the ordinance. We had 96 reported cases of a lot of copper thefts, and a lot of the businesses were getting hit pretty hard with that stuff. That's where the scrap metal reference to copper and all those metals mentioned in that ordinance comes from. Along with that, as long as we were working on that, we were looking at burglaries and thefts that involve jewelry and gold. In the last, since 2012, for 4 years, we've had over 2,000, the yearly total, 2,008 burglaries just last year alone. The last 4 years, it's been a little bit lower than that. But last year was 10,600 thefts, anyway, of those burglaries, what we had was 784 over the last 4 years that involved gold, silver, jewelry. Gold and silver jewelry, we don't break it down into individual types. But gold and silver coins, there were another 94 that were mentioned in that. So over those 4 years, 878 burglaries that involved gold, silver, jewelry, that sort of thing. When we put the ordinance together and we finally came to it the last couple of weeks, we ended up sending one of my detectives over to the scrap metal folks and to what precious metal folks we could get a hold of, and briefly talk about it, tell them where to find the ordinance, and tell them what the public process was for this. Overall, and I don't know if we have any of the scrap metal folks here, most of the scrap metal folks were surprised that we had done something similar earlier. When my detectives notified some of the gold folks, I talked to Miss Tony, who's sitting up here in front, several times on the phone, and to a degree, we had some differences and some agreements. She agreed with some of the notifications on the jewelry, but what the overwhelming thing was a disagreement on the bulk gold and the statute that revolves around that. What the police department's concern is we have pawn shop regulations that are up and running, and frankly, that's where the 30-day hold that I understand a lot of people are upset with came from. We were trying to figure out how not to victimize the victims any further by how, once we find something is stolen, how can we get it back to them? Well, with the way it's set up now, we can. So the other part of the ordinance is the identification. We've had several, and I want to say it right up front, whenever we contacted the gold folks, they've been very cooperative with us, providing with information. But what that does is that only alerts us to the thefts where people are trying to get rid of stuff that we know about or that they know about that looks suspicious. It does not show the ones that pop up, hence the identification part of the sales in this ordinance. So that's what we're looking for. We were looking for the identification of the people that are selling stuff inadvertently, unknowingly maybe, not, these folks not knowing it's stolen, but how can we get that data so we can figure out the stuff where we don't have suspect information, where we can say, okay, this is similar to that was stolen in this, now we have a suspect this start, and we can keep these folks from victimizing, both selling stolen merchandise to these folks, plus not re-victimizing the victims of the burglary again by saying, well, we can't get your property back because it's gone over. That's kind of in a nutshell what's been happening. I know it's been a long time coming from what talking to, or listening to these folks talk and talking to them. It's been a long, or a revisitation of some of this stuff as well. So that's kind of the background from the police department perspective, folks.
Thank you, Ted. Todd?
Okay, so, I'm just gonna walk through, certainly not line by line, but what's labeled as Assembly Ordinance 2017-31, and there should be copies back there if you don't have one. We need more, first happy to get more. The first page is a series of whereas clauses that really is just providing a legislative basis, a legislative history for why this is here. One of the, Lieutenant Henning mentioned the copper thefts. You see the fourth whereas that the scrap metal dealer record requirements that are in this ordinance pretty much copy that from state statute. And this isn't an unusual thing. A lot of our criminal code, for example, is basically copying what the state has, but it gives a tool for closer supervision than we get with the state. The states came in, the law was passed in 2014 and became law January 1st, 2015. I'm not aware that it's been made use of. One of the things that it's a record keeping requirement. Police officer can go in and look at the records under the state law. If a person doesn't keep the records they're supposed to, under state law, it's a misdemeanor. The way we've structured this, it's a civil fine, because the goal isn't to send somebody to jail or even to get money. The goal is to have an investigative tool for the police. The thing we added that the state didn't do is that someone dealing in scrap metal would have to also not only keep records, but proactively report to the police the same way that pawn shops already do. And I'm just gonna pause there for a minute because Lieutenant Henning, you've talked about leads online before. Could you just briefly how that works? Because that would probably be the method of reporting.
Leads Online is a program that the police department has bought. It's provided free to existing pawn shops. It can be adapted to this year as well, where scrap metal dealers or precious metal dealers can go online. Once you know the system, which does not take very long to understand, it's just a consistent way of recording who the seller is and what items are sold. So it's a database that only the police department has access to, so we can verify and compare to reports coming in, so we can say, that looks suspicious, and then we've got something more. But it's free to the people that are using it. The police department pays for it.
So, as you notice in the fifth whereas, Alaska was the last state to have a scrap metal reporting statute. Copper thefts seem to rise and fall with the market, the value of copper. I did read some of the legislative history with the state statute. There's a lot of support from the general contractor industry. In fact, the way it got started with the state was there was effort just to kind of clean up some old statutes, and there was one that dealt with it was like regulation of junkyards that went back to pre-state days, and they were just going to repeal it. And like I think it was General Contractors Association and others said, wait a minute, we need this law that has this record-keeping requirement because we're getting copper stolen out of our yards and things like that. So that was the background there. The precious metal ordinance part of this pretty much copied the scrap metal in an effort to keep it simple. That's something else that there's different variations of this around the country, both for scrap metal and for precious metal, and how that is done. Now, one thing I do want to be clear on, because I know that the 30-day hold when it comes to precious metals is a big issue, and I'm talk to Ms. Tony on the phone also. So different municipal governments around the country and state governments do have something dealing with precious metals. However, and our own pawn shop ordinance has this 30-day hold for anything they take in. And that is pretty standard around the country and has been for, I think, quite some time. However, we have not found anybody around the country that has had a 30-day hold across the board on precious metal type transactions. The few we found that do accept out, well, I would say pretty much everything but jewelry. They'll call jewelry and crafted metal is what they'll include, something that's artistic and arguably more identifiable, but they typically, what I've seen, they accept out ingots, they don't say gold dust, but that kind of thing, coins of numismatic value, which is collectible value, and they accept out those things in their definition. So this would be unique in the country, that aspect of this. That being said, let's go to page 2 and kind of walk through some of the highlights. So basically the first part, 10.20.015, is just saying this would, auctioneers would be included in this. It adds precious metals and scrap metals to what they're already required to do under the auction ordinance. And then under section 2, 10.20.037, this adds scrap metal dealers, precious metal dealers, to this part of the code in terms of what they need to do. The bulk of this for scrap metal then is in section 3, starting at line 36 there. So the first part under A, 10.20.041A, has the list of records, kinds of records that they're required to keep. And again, this all comes pretty much word for word out of state statute, what you see in 1 through 8 there. In B on the next page, so there has to be a signed statement that it's not stolen property. C, this is the part that says a law enforcement officer can inspect the records during regular hours. D, reports to the police. That was the part that where they're proactively reporting, presumably using this Leads Online program. That, as I mentioned, is not in the state statute, but it's in our own pawn ordinance. And then E says that they're retaining these records, dealer is to retain records for 5 years. F provides an exemption. Basically it's saying if you're someone who's regularly in the business of this, of selling this, and they already have all your information, you don't have to do it every single time. G is the penalty, which, as I said, is not a criminal penalty, as with the state. It's a civil fine of not more than $500. And there's a table at the end of the ordinance that lists for the various parts of this what the fine would be. As you see, it's and that starts on page 7. It's mostly $500, some are $300, and I pretty much took that from the towing ordinance, which is fairly new, simply because the towing ordinance was another one where our ordinance says you got to have this record, this record, this record, this record, and to me there was a rough equivalency there. Then definitions is section, going back to page 4, is fairly important because that says who does this apply to. So the dealer means scrap metal dealer, and then number 3 talks about what kind of scrap metal. So copper is in there, that's the big one. It does not include ferrous metal, so any iron it doesn't include, or any metal beverage containers. Doesn't include gold, silver, platinum, those are covered under the precious metals. Number 4, scrap metal dealer is a person who purchases scrap metal for the purpose of resale or processing. So if you're like my parents who live on an old farm in North Dakota and you find that the previous 100 years worth of owners had thrown a bunch of scrap metal out, somewhere, and you haul that in, this isn't gonna apply to you because you're not a person who regularly deals in the purchase of and resale of scrap metal. Okay, so section 4, and this is the precious metal dealer record requirements in 20042. And again, listing the records, it's the same as the scrap metal one in terms of the records they need to have. And really the rest of it is the same. B is the same. C with the inspection, D with reporting to police. And F as far as having to keep it for 5 years. E and I should back up to E, that's the 30-day part, which is not in the scrap metal part of the ordinance. This is here something that Lieutenant Henny has talked about, the police wanted as an additional tool, and this is part of the precious metal one. And then going to page 6, skipping to definitions. Here again, dealers, a precious metal dealer. Number 3, precious metal. And I looked at different ordinances around the country because these can vary a little bit as far as what you include. But basically, gold, silver, and platinum are the big ones. The other ones you're getting to rare earth metals, and I don't think you're going to see those very often. But and then, so number 4, again, precious metal dealer is defined as a person who purchases precious metal for the purpose of resale or processing. Early on, I think there was a question from an assembly member, was there potential of casting the net too wide so a person that has grandma's jewelry and decides they're gonna sell it, they inherit it, is this gonna apply to them? No, because they're not a person who purchases precious metal for the purpose of resale or processing. It was something they had and decided it was time to sell. One of the other things I'll comment on, because it came up in some of the conversations, was concerns about privacy, and Lieutenant Henny may be able to address this too, because all these records that are being kept, and of course, no surprise, government has a lot of information on people, like the IRS, all kinds of record keeping, and all kinds of personal information. I think in our discussions, when it came to like pawn shop records and information they have to turn in, that is something that the police department treats as private information that's not gonna be given out generally.
Correct.
Also, one of the things, if this is a concern, because we do have a Public Records Act, I've never seen anybody make a public records request for that kind of thing. I would consider it to fall under the part that says that is within a reasonable expectation of privacy, but you can specifically say that these kinds of records, this could be an amendment, these kinds of records that are collected are not public records within the definition of our Public Records Act. And we've done that, for example, with the 49th State Angels Fund. There's various business information they have to submit, and there's a long list of things under that in 3.90, our Public Records Ordinance, that says these are not public records. So I think that's pretty much it for initial
Thank you.
presentation.
Ms. Gray Jackson, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification, so if I had a gold watch or a gold bracelet that I no longer wanted, and I took it to Oxford, that's excluded, correct, from this ordinance?
Right,
Okay.
because you wouldn't be in the
No,
business.
it's not, I'm not excluded, you are.
And I'm sorry, did you mean yourself?
No, not me, but because the way I read this, it says that it doesn't include gold, silver, platinum, okay?
Oh.
So my question is, if I brought to Oxford a gold bracelet that I no longer wanted, is that included in, as far as?
As written now, yes, it would.
Well,
Yeah,
Just the
in terms of recording.
well, I'm a little confused.
Recording the seller, and then they would have the reporting requirement.
Right, but, well, then I'm a little confused, don't you think?
Go ahead.
Okay, because it says, in this paragraph, metal does not include, so unless I'm just not understanding.
Well, are you looking at the scrap metal part or
I'm
the
looking at
precious metal?
H, page 4H6.
Okay,
For the
and
definition of
that's,
scrap metal.
so section 3 that starts on page 2, that's scrap metal dealer record requirements. And then, starting on page 4, section 4 is precious metal dealer record requirements. So that would fall under the precious metal part of the ordinance.
And she would have to report it. And hold it for 30, and hold it for 30.
Todd?
The way it's written now,
Thank
yes.
you, Mr. Chairman, I'm fine, thank you.
So did that explain it?
No.
Okay.
We have to work out some more with that. Question from assembly members. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking here at page 3. Toward the top there, number 4. And it's, you want to get a description, including the license plate information from the vehicle delivering it. And I'm wondering, I don't have experience in selling scrap metal or precious metals or anything, so I don't know exactly how all this works. And are you trying to gather the license plate information because you think there's a good chance that the person is using a fake ID when they're selling this metal?
So that came straight out of the state statute. And, I mean, I don't think anybody's married to any of this. And if, you know, the police don't feel that's a useful investigative tool, strikes me as a former prosecutor as probably useful information to have. You know, what did you drive up in? So if whatever was sold later turns up to be stolen, you know, it's something else you can track to try and find out who sold the stolen material. Do you have any?
Mr. Peterson, any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, when people sell scrap and precious metal, do they typically get paid in cash that day, or do they get sent a check later, or does it depend on what the volume they're selling is?
It's my understanding, sir, that it's a check.
It's a check.
But the dealers here probably could answer that, public testimony.
And, well, so obviously, if you're writing a check to the person, they'd have difficulty in cashing or depositing that check if they were using a fake ID.
Correct.
Great. All right, thank you.
Other question from assembly members? Mr. Steele?
I know with, I unfortunately took a bunch of scrap wire and stuff from a construction site in the house, down to recycle it. And the problem is when you have a mixed bag, it's tough to, one, identify the precious, the copper that might be in there. And the people accepting it don't wanna have to separate it out and hold it for 30 days on spec.
And the scrap metal part, they won't have to, the scrap metal part of this, they don't have to hold it for 30 days. That's not written into this.
I misunderstood.
And I think the consideration there, was that, you know, it's big, it's bulky, it's difficult to do. Yeah, and I understand there's a little confusion between the two parts of this. It might have been better to run it through as two different ordinances, although it's not unusual to have one ordinance that plugs into different parts of the code. So we've got the scrap metal part, which generally is to address copper theft, and you're dealing with, you know, big, large-scale industrial type thefts and deals and things like that. And then we've got the precious metal, which generally is gonna be relatively small but highly valuable amounts, which is defined as gold, silver, platinum. And that is what has the 30-day hold, similar to what pawn shops do. The other thing I was gonna mention, I just think it's good to have, you know, everybody talk about everything. And I'm not an expert on pawn shops, and again, Lieutenant Henning, feel free to jump in. The 30-day hold came from the fact that that's what is part of the pawn shop ordinance, but as I understand how pawn shops work, that is part of their business model already. The way companies like Oxford Assaying work, that is not part of their business model, generally speaking, the hold. And again, she may want to address that. that more. So in that sense, it may well be more of a burden on them than it is on a pawn shop who not only, is it part of their business model, historically, those kind of laws have been around for a long time, including saying you need to hold it. So they've been tested in courts, like I said, a 30-day hold on precious metal sales, like we're talking about here. I'm not aware that anybody else has done that or that it's been tested in the courts. So legally, it's kind of out there a little more than the pawn shop.
Other questions, assembly members? Todd, quick question. This does not relate to guns, does not relate to cars. I got a call from Great Northern Guns worried we were going to stop them from selling guns.
No, it doesn't relate to guns or cars at all, because in both parts, in definition, it says, with scrap, it's only scrap metal, and scrap metal is defined as these metals, and the precious metal is defined as these metals, so it would not apply to either of those.
Thank you. Somebody's fear mongering some of my friends out there, so I figured I better ask the author himself. Okay, if there's another question for some members, we'll let the public. You'll have about 3 or 4 minutes. Please identify yourself for the record. We'll start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, 4 minutes.
My name is Philip Paul Widener. I sent a letter yesterday to the assembly members and the city attorney and the mayor. I'd ask to be made a mark as a part of the record. I'll be as brief as I can because I know your time is precious. I just ask everybody, first of all, to reflect on where we are. We're in Anchorage, Alaska. I emphasize Alaska, and I'd ask the assembly to think about what they're being asked to do, which is to invade the rights to privacy and the due business and due process of established members. I set out in my letter potential objections and the possibility of litigation if this thing is passed, but I think it should be worked out without litigation. But I want to point out that this is essentially a criminal statute. It imposes a civil fine, but it's a fine sufficient enough to denote criminality for purposes of a violation. That means that it cannot be overbroad, and it cannot impact the constitutional rights of people wanting to do business in this community. With all due respect to counsel, if you look at the definition of precious metal dealer on page 6, it says a precious metal dealer means a person who purchases precious metal for the purpose of resale or processing. So any of the assembly members today, if you buy 5 coins with the intent that you may resell them to make profit on them, you are a precious metal dealer. So you would have to keep these records. It'd be a civil fine if you didn't do it. You'd have to report monthly to the city. Anybody in this state or in this community that buys any coins with the intent of possibly reselling it to make money is covered. This is totally overbroad. The implications are frightening for people that want to, for instance, go to Oxford and sell. The way it's drafted right now, without the amendment, it includes any gold that any miner brings in. And it's especially frightening that you have to get their name and address, because if that's available, and with all due respect to the police department saying, well, we'll treat them as confidential, the fact is there's going to be a record. If somebody finds out that a person is going into Oxford and selling gold, that's going to give them a lead to where their home is and where they can go burglarize their home. So it's totally overbroad. I frankly don't think the Assembly's got the authority to pass this kind of a statute. Now, it defines precious metals. It says a person is anybody purchasing. It says a transaction means the purchase of precious metal by a precious metal dealer from another person. Am I out of time?
No, yes, sir. You got another minute, 30 seconds.
All right, good. The question you asked is right on. They gave me kind of an evasive answer. The truth is, the way this is drafted right now, if you go in and sell Tony your grandmother's watch, she's got a report. That's the way it's drafted. If they do an exemption for a non-identifiable article, they won't, but it still would apply. If you go in and you sell a few coins to Tony that your grandmother left you, she's got a report. And I think this is a really dangerous path that's being proposed here. The scrap metal thing is another issue. There's some problems with that. But the state statute doesn't include gold. So to say that they're copying the state statute is simply not true. They're not copying the state statute and applying it to precious metals. So I would ask that you seriously consider not passing the ordinance in any form. If it is passed, there needs to be a specific exemption for like coins, things of that nature, bullion. It has to be no 30-day hold. And this idea about monthly reports to the police department. 1984 is passed, but that smacks of 1984 to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I'd like to speak.
It does make noise.
Perfect time.
I'm Tony Loving Goodrich. I'm owner and CEO of Oxford Asset Refining Corp. For the longest continuous gold buyer in the state. We've been here for 36 years. Alaska Corporation. We serve the placer mining community from small mom and pop operation up to a mine that may have 50 or 70 employees. I think there's a lot of just miseducated people who are involved in the process. And I don't expect you guys to get impression, no, I'm certainly not an expert on assembly proceedings or government. So I would just like to educate you guys a little bit about how this would impact the municipality. I pulled up my slowest month, January, and I purchased $12 million. So if I held it for 30 days based on the market, I would have lost 1.2 million. So that would mean precious metals dealers would no longer operate within the municipality of Anchorage. It's just what it is. Not only that, if I asked everyone to come in for their driver's license, and I know over the last 36 years, we've sold that individual maybe $1 million worth of gold, and they're selling back 10 crew rents to say they paid it for their kids, tuition. I now have their address, and I know where all that gold is, and that's why I've had customers, I'm on a first name basis with 21 years, and I have no idea where they live, nor do I want to know. I don't want to be with a bullseye on my back. I love your Bosco's license plate, but if I had Oxford on my license plate, I'd be scared of it. The best defense for people on tangible assets is anonymity and confidentiality. So HIPAA guidelines have, been enforced, but my building would be a target with that kind of information in it. We're talking professional thieves too, not the 868. And I've been victimized probably more than anyone I've ever met financially, being in the business I'm in. So I'm sympathetic to those people, and that's why I worked hand in hand with APD for 36 years to put away as many people as possible that are harming my customers and my community. Oftentimes, unfortunately, they're members of the family who have gotten into the drug problem, and they steal from their own parents' safe. And that is a lot of times what it is. And we need to take an EVR recording. We take information from anyone who thinks has done something wrong. We take their name. We have copies of canceled checks. We know what account went through. We know all of that information. We wrap it up with a bow and we give it to APD, and the DA loves us. So I feel like I'm going to suffer more than any other business, and I've been the most ethical and honest. So I'm very disappointed that I didn't get a call earlier than this now from people drafting such an ordinance who knows that I've supported their business for so long to be educated about what they're talking about. Non-identifiable items. Bars like this, Oxford produces, it's a 10-ounce silver bar. There's no serial number, there's nothing. There's millions of them out. Even if you were burglarized, you can't tell me this is your bar. It's just impossible. And I don't know if any of you have an investment portfolio, but you kind of know prices go up and down. And mine goes up and down every second. There's a quantity market open. And it would be completely impossible for us to hold metals. And to come up with money to write the checks we write without selling the metals. It would put us completely out of the meeting. And I'm Diamond and UA alumni, I don't want to move to Westville. It's the last place I want to live. I mean, Bert Cottle's a good customer, and I'm sure he'd love to have us, but I'm not going. And this can't pass. It just can't. And it's also, I think it's important to remember that this state was founded on mining and gold and silver. We have a lot of people who live here who really like their constitutional right to own it without the government knowing about it. And I follow all federal guidelines on reporting. But, someone can sell me up to 1,000 ounces of silver a day, and I don't have to report it to the IRS. And that's a bag this size, 10,000 dimes. And how would APD want me to recognize one of those dimes?
Thank you. you, ma'am. Other questions? Yes?
Well, does he have some?
You got something, John, for her?
You promised some samples.
I did.
That's what I
I
was,
ran out of time.
that's what I was thinking.
I ran out of time. I talked too much. Here's an example of what a friend of mine who happens to be, an executive vice president, GCI, came and sold these, broke a chains, and I don't think she's full. We were joking about how we all know these in the eighties in Alaska. And she was excited to get a check, and I know her, and I didn't ask her where she lives, because I've also sold her millions of dollars of gold. These are examples of bullion, gold, silver, and tell me if you can come apart. And this is placer gold. And I do about 50,000 ounces of this a year.
I didn't know we had a bribe.
I'm taking it back.
Oh, I want some money.
I don't think they're the ones screaming stuff
Christine?
Yes, my name is Christine Hill. My husband and I have Alaska Auction Company and Dwayne's Antique Market. I think the intent of this is to actually protect the public. Well, we are the public too. Protect us. And I tell you, I'm sorry to say, but I have been victims and a victim of crime over and over again, where we've had people, come in. We spent thousands of dollars for security to keep our customers safe, and still, there are crimes that are committed. We have good laws. Let's go ahead and enforce the good laws that we have right now. We have a good, very network between all of us that you see here in the room. I mean, if someone has something stolen, it gets across the network, that they've had something stolen. And I have had occasion more than once where someone's brought something in, and it certainly married up with some of the information that was given to me that was stolen from somebody. So we called the police. I stalled and talked to this person, this thief, for about an hour and a half to stall him until the police could get there. And to try and make conversation was very interesting. I mean, anyway, but I held him there until the police did come finally after an hour and a half, and they arrested her. But there are many times that they actually do not come because they're too busy or whatever. So anyways, we have good laws. Let's just enforce the laws we have and keep them in prison and in jail. And I might add, I've never heard of Leads Online, but I think it would be great if you want to spend some money to go ahead and put online for the entire public, publish photographs and descriptions of what's been stolen. So that way if someone comes in and brings something in, a gold nugget watch or whatever, we can type in gold nugget watch on the website, have all the gold nugget watches that are stolen, appear, and we can just marry that up right there and then and there. And call the police, and hopefully they'll come and arrest the person that's trying to sell it to me. Anyway, again, we have a good network of people already. I don't like thieves. I don't want to buy them from the thieves. I don't care if someone gave me a 20-pound gold nugget. If I have suspect that they're a thief, I don't want it for $1. Because they're hurting me. They hurt the whole people, and it's all drug related too. I think that's my opinion. So that's kind of all I have to say. Thank you, and thanks for the free advertising.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Chris.
Ron, I'll get back to you in a minute. I can see you back there.
I'm with Alaska Scrap and Recycling. We've been in business in Anchorage for the last 5 years. We buy all kinds of scrap, mostly cars, copper, aluminum, brass, all the Inconels, the high nickel alloys and things like that. I have no problem with taking people's driver's license. We have it already in our system. Anybody that sells to us, we have their driver's license. We have cameras that take photographs of them when they're making a sale, right? Even on our small scales where we buy the copper and the aluminum and brass, all the non-ferrous metals, we have cameras that take pictures of the material and the person. So I think we've been proactive that way. The only concern I have is holding on to 30 days. We're talking about maybe 100,000 pounds of material, and we've gotten broken into. So then the thieves know that, okay, Alaska Scrap is holding on to 40,000 pounds of copper. How am I going to get in there?
Exactly.
And they'll find their way in there. Because we've been broken into a couple of times. Fortunately, we have camera system and they were kind of stupid, they didn't take the good stuff. But anyways, I think the 30 days, I think that should, I mean, copper is copper. I mean, you could take a copper tube and cut it up into 5 pieces, and you could tell in a 2,000-pound box what your copper looks like. It's all wires, tubing, all different shapes that are very similar. Where a thief could take it and make it to whatever he wants it to look like. If he's taken, say, a transformer, there's bus bar in there. Well, he's not going to bring the whole transformer in. He's going to take that copper off of there. He's going to cut it up or mangle it or something, and he's going to, sell it to us. So I think the 30-day thing, I don't have too much of a problem with keeping records, but keeping the material, it's all time sensitive. Markets just like precious metals, copper goes up and down on a daily basis, and I think it could hurt our business. Plus, what are we warehousing? Is it a big evidence room? Is the city going to pay me my warehouse space for 40, 50, 100,000 pounds of material that you couldn't identify one from another, just like you get passed around, these things, they all look the same. So unless you get that report from the police, as soon as it's stolen, know exactly what it looks like, and maybe if it comes in that way, we could set it aside. We have a network too, all the scrap dealers, recyclers, we all call each other, hey, I got this stolen, or somebody got that stolen, keep an eye out. We think it's this guy or that guy. If he comes in, let us know. I mean, so we have a network that we talk to each other too. I have an objection with the 30-day thing. That's a business model that could make us go broke.
One quick question, do you pay in cash or check?
We pay in check, but we do pay cash under $50.
This was a problem.
To his point, is the 30 days part of the precious metal or the scrap? I thought it was just-
Only the precious metal, it wouldn't apply to his operation, because it doesn't apply to scrap metal like copper.
The way it reads in there, it looked like the whole, everything is.
No, it's not in section 3, which is the part that deals with scrap metal.
He wrote it, he intends for it to not apply to you. Mr. Wilton, sir?
No, so I just want to assume that would come up.
Let's see, Ron, it was not about Brother Francis, we're fine.
Okay, Ron Oliva owned Grubstake Auction. I'd like to concur and agree with everything Christine of the last auction said. But also, we are victims. And to tell you the network, I had stainless steel downhole tubing. It's numbered throughout the length of the tubing. It got stolen, but it got cut. It sprung out, and he couldn't get it all in the back of his truck. The neighbor was the Department of Corrections person, spotted it in the evening, got the truck. We went to Snitzer. Chris helped us out, said, look out for this tubing. We end up tracing it back, who brought it in from the valley to Anchorage. Ended up, when they went and cashed the check, showed their ID, took a picture of them at the camera of the bank, had all that evidence, and the prosecuting attorney from the Matsu called me and told me we're not going to prosecute. There's not enough evidence. Plus, with SB 91, for an auctioneer to do all this on $100 values, ridiculous. They're not even going to slap their fingers up to $1,000. So you have $4,600 worth of fines if we don't comply, and we're the law-abiding end of this, and we just don't see results when you finally catch the criminal. So the end results, maybe the cart before the horse. You guarantee you're going to put these guys away, and I'll help you any way I can. But once you catch them, and you let them off so they can come back and laugh in our faces and steal again, that doesn't help anyone. It may make more work for police, but hey, they got better things to do than waste time on this, and it's just a big circle. So I'm real uncomfortable with the, being burdened with this, and real uncomfortable with the results. It's just gonna eat us up and to no good.
Thank you, Ron. By the way, despite not pass SB 91, we're not that bad. That's the state legislature.
Yes, sir. My name is Jerry Levin, and I'm one of the original partners of Oxford prior to selling out to Tony about 6-8 years ago. And this isn't the first time this issue has been visited. It's not the second, it's probably the third or fourth. And we've always worked with both the police department and the municipality. And I think you can testify that anytime you've ever walked into Oxford, they've always been willing to help you any way they can. So it's putting it's become onerous for the precious metals dealers. Okay, what would be more helpful is if the police department, when they do get a report, if they can send it out to the pawn shops, to the precious metals dealers, so they don't buy. Nobody wants to buy. I can speak for every one of the dealers in this room. Nobody wants to buy stolen items.
That's right.
Okay, you buy a class ring that's stolen, and you get this image that you're a fence. On the other hand, you're selling somebody 1,000 ounces of gold. You don't want that to mix. Nobody wants to buy stolen goods, and nobody wants to be involved with that. So if the police department could do something to help prevent the purchase, right before it's ever purchased, that would be a much bigger help than passing an ordinance that becomes onerous to the business owners. And we've discussed this over the years. As I said, this is at least the third or fourth time this has come before the assembly.
Lieutenant Henning, how many burglaries do we have this last year, approximately?
2008, someone was paying attention to that this year.
That's the problem. That's what brought this to us. All the burglars we have going on in Anchorage today. We have homeowners calling us saying, "Why don't you guys do something about it? These people broke into my house, stole my gold, stole my jewelry." And the state, you're correct, it doesn't prosecute. We need to know SB 91. Anybody else want to testify? Yes, sir.
My name is Walt Earl. I have the antique gallery in Anchorage. I've been in business 32 years. And in spite of all this, I have a good attitude. I'll tell you one quick story. The last time I was broken into, which was January 3rd, the gentleman took the privilege of a fire axe to knock out $5,000 worth of my windows. I have 32 cameras. I have 32 videos of him and his accomplice. As soon as it happened, we called it obviously emergency. Nobody came. An hour and a half later, the two lovely police officers who have to patrol the streets stopped by and saw the broken glass. So we had a nice conversation. In the meantime, I put it on Facebook, posted a reward with the videos. Within 30 minutes, I had the name of the individual that did it. I had his accomplice. I had where he worked. I had 2 volunteers to go get him. I had his address. I had his vehicle, both of them. Which I called the police and to pick up the tapes. And I realized manpower-wise, we got that. Okay. So the gentleman that came by, the officer, sauntered by 3 weeks later. Well, no comment. I then pursued it since January. Nothing has been done. I sent my own people over to the house. In 25 minutes, 12 people came and went. I don't think he's that social. I think he's dealing in drugs. Opposite. He's still dealing in drugs. I'd be glad to give his address. I then called the city police, talked to the detectives, told them that I would pay for the taxi fare to go pick him up and take him to the jail if that would save time. I told him if I had a place to incarcerate him, I'd personally do it. And I still have a good attitude. So what you're really asking me to do today is the next time Carl Bailey's grandmother comes in for a Cindy Lawrence and sells it to me, you're gonna ask me to throw it across the hood of the car, take a picture of the license plate, and fill out the paperwork. I'm joking. The bottom line is manpower. Do we have the manpower to do what you're trying to accomplish? I don't think you do. That's been demonstrated to me on 5 robberies. Silence sometimes can say something. And you got
I want to interrupt, sir.
You got a predicament, I know you do. But the bottom line is I'm tired of having my windows broken out. And if somebody wants to stop by in the police department, I'd be glad to see them, but all I get is lip service. And I don't even get that. They won't even return a call.
Chairman, if I could have a word.
Yes, sir.
Understand the problems with everything going on with police response, believe me, I understand.
Yeah, I
However,
sympathize with you.
just to address a couple of data collection issues.
Yeah.
All of this is pieces in the puzzle for us, it helps us
I understand.
investigate cases. When we're asking for data on folks, we're the only folks that would see that leads online.
As long as we're having
And
monologue.
it's a piece in the puzzle. For instance, we had a case where, a house sitter's son came in and stole $13,000 worth of jewelry and gold nuggets. Oxford was very helpful in that. We were able to tie the pawn tickets to the gold nugget that y'all are saying is unidentifiable, however, the circumstances identified. It gives us another piece of the puzzle so we can get this guy and put him in jail. How long he stays in the jail, unfortunately, is not up to us. But we were able to deal with that because we were able to put all the pieces together. And we're just looking for a consistent way to gather that information so that we can put pieces together and make it a little bit easier to go and apprehend.
To keep the monologue going, how many people do you have in place right now to accomplish what you want to propose?
For data collection, I've got one pawn clerk. If we all, instead of having 16 different systems, if we all go onto one system, that pawn clerk can compare all the data with the reports coming in. That's what we're trying to do, is to make it uniform.
How many people do you have on burglary?
On my burglary unit, not enough.
I know the answer.
Not enough.
You have one.
Thank you,
Well,
Lieutenant, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
It's on a golden platter.
Yeah, question for you, Todd, and I guess for you, Lieutenant. So, you said that the portion that deals with scrap metal is basically taken from the state law that's already in place, or significant portions of it are, is that right?
Yes, the main thing that is different is the state statute does not have a reporting requirement, only the record keeping, but it includes that law enforcement officer can come in and look at the records.
Do you have models from other states with regard to precious metals? How do other jurisdictions deal with these issues?
And as I said, I basically use the scrap metal as my template for precious metal, but I can't say I found that exactly in other states. Other states and municipalities deal with precious metal in various different ways. But this wasn't modeled on any of them in particular. As I said, nobody else has tried to include all gold, all silver in all its forms and have a 30-day hold to boot. Didn't see that anywhere.
Questions from your members? Any last comments? We've got to end this meeting, because we've got
One quick question. To clarify this, are we talking precious metals and melting? Are we talking other things? Painting, art?
I don't think paintings
Household
are coming
goods?
into this, sir. Todd?
No
That's a
paintings,
legitimate question.
no art, unless the art is art gold. or-
So essentially, we're addressing that.
Right.
With hat in the back, you want to make a phone? We've got to end this meeting, because we've got a mandatory Sunday meeting starting at 3:30.
I own North Pacific Auctioneers and 10/20/015. I do mostly defaulted storage auctions, and I gave up my auction house because of my health. When I crack a door open, I have anywhere from 15 to 50 people standing in line to look at that unit, and I find a bunch of firearms in there. I have to now shut the door, tell the people we can't sell it, tell the manager he has to inform the police and hold that unit for 30 days. This 10/20/15 is totally unworkable in my business that I'm doing now. And as far as precious metals and coins and stuff go, when I did have an auction house, most of my precious metals and others came from estates. So that was a non-issue according to this proposal, because it was the executors selling mom and dad's belongings. So would I have had to inform the police that I'm selling Joe's estate, and then hang on it for
see what you're talking about in 10-20-015, everybody, that it's at the top of page 2, where it talks about when gold, silver, et cetera, furs, guns. That is existing law right now. The new part is what's underlined, where it says precious metals or scrap metals. So to the degree you have to do something about guns and it says the inventory is available for police use for at least 24 hours prior to the sale, that is existing law right now and has been since 1985, it looks like.
Okay, we're gonna. Can I have 30 seconds, please? You still got 2
You got
minutes.
30 seconds, then we've got to end this, we've got another meeting.
I'll make it 30 seconds, all right? Nobody's addressed the overbread. It's unconstitutional. I don't think the Assembly's got the authority to pass it. I don't think you can regulate private business like this, and I'd ask you to think about that, because it's overbread. The way it's drafted right now, it applies to any person who buys this thing. Absolutely unconstitutional.
Tony, have you seen the 3 amendments?
I have.
The purpose of this was to deal with the average person out there that gets burglarized. We've got burglars going all over in Anchorage. In fact, the other night I just met with some people from Midtown that are getting hit repeatedly to the point that this is about to terminate, because all the burglaries. That was the purpose of driving this. What we're gonna do with this, we've heard a lot of comments tonight. So it's gonna come in front of us Tuesday. I'm gonna ask the chairman to postpone it for a couple of weeks so we can do an S version on this. I appreciate you being here.
What'll happen though, if I may, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay, the public hearing still has to be open.
I know.
All right, and then the public hearing will be continued, and as Mr. Trainee
For 2
just said, it'll be continued, until March 7th.
So it'll still be on the agenda for the 28th.
It has to be, it's already there.
But it'll be continued for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
a vote won't be taken.
Thanks for being here.